That night still sits in the back of my mind, like a shadow I can't shake. It was a few months ago. My buddy Thomas and I were at my place, just hanging out, drinking a few beers, wasting time like we usually did. He still lived with his parents, so crashing at mine was a pretty regular thing for him. His little escape, I guess. By 10, he decided he'd just stay the night. We even started making plans for the next day. Only thing was, he hadn't brought any clothes, so before we got too deep into the drinks, he said he'd just drive home real quick and grab some stuff. His place was only 5 minutes away. I stayed behind, lounging on the couch. The storm outside was insane. I hadn't even noticed it earlier, but now the rain was hammering the windows like it wanted inside. I figured Thomas would be back in no time. 15 minutes went by, then 20. Finally, I heard a knock at the front door. Relieved, I grabbed my beer and casually went to open it. But when I swung the door open, my stomach dropped. It wasn't Thomas. Some guy stood there, drenched head to toe in black, rain dripping off him like he'd been standing out there for hours. He had this smile, not wide, not cartoonish, just wrong. The kind of smile that feels like it's hiding something sharp underneath. Before I could even say a word, he slid one foot into the doorway. He leaned his head just enough to look past me into the house, like he was deciding whether he belonged in there. I stumbled out an apology, told him I thought he was someone else. I tried shutting the door, but his foot stayed planted. He just kept smiling at me. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the storm. For 4 or 5 long seconds, neither of us said a word, just me pushing gently at the door, and him smiling. Finally, he pulled his foot back, that same grin still plastered across his face. I shut the door fast and locked it. I actually laughed to myself after, like nervously laughed. Sent Thomas a quick text joking about some creep hanging around. Then I sat back down, telling myself I'd overreacted. But Thomas was taking longer than usual. Eventually I got up, walked to the window, and saw his car parked on the curb. Relief hit me, but then confusion followed, because Thomas wasn't there. I stepped outside, rain soaking me instantly. His car was off, empty. His phone lit up inside when I called him, but there was no Thomas. That's when my brain snapped back to the guy at the door. The wrong smile, the foot in the doorway. My pulse started hammering. I ran back inside and locked the door. The house felt different, too quiet, and then I noticed it, the hallway light. I always left it on, but now it was off. The back of the house was shrouded in this heavy darkness. The storm outside made it worse. Every flicker of lightning stretched the shadows unnaturally long. I forced myself to walk down that hallway, my socks leaving wet marks on the hardwood. The silence in the house was almost humming in my ears, broken only by the occasional creak. At the end of the hallway, I stopped cold, pressed against the wall, barely visible in the dark. A figure, the faint outline of someone standing there, motionless, as if trying to blend into the wall. My breath caught in my throat. The figure moved, slowly, deliberately, stepping toward me with something raised in his hand. I didn't wait to see what it was. My body just reacted. I bolted, threw myself through the front door, and ran barefoot into the storm. The rain blinded me, but I didn't stop. I cut across the neighbor's yard, ducked under their porch, and dialed 911 with shaking hands. From that porch, I could see my house through the rain. Minutes later, 2 cops walked up to my front door. Calm, cautious. Then, suddenly, both raised their guns and sprinted inside. My stomach turned to ice. Later, I found out they'd seen him. That man, still standing in my hallway. They chased him, but he slipped out the back, vaulted the fence, and vanished into the storm like he'd been born from it. As for Thomas, they found him. 5 minutes later, he was tied up inside a car down the road. The man had ambushed him the second he parked, held him at gunpoint, forced him into another vehicle. Then he came back for me. That thing in his hand I hadn't seen clearly. It was a gun, pointed at me the entire time. If I had frozen, if I hadn't run, I would have ended up just like Thomas, or worse. The car he used was stolen. They never caught him, never figured out why he chose us, or what his real plan was. The scariest part? I opened the door for him. I let him get that close. And to this day, I wonder if Thomas hadn't gone to grab his clothes. If I hadn't been expecting someone else at the door that night, maybe that smiling man wouldn't have needed an excuse to come inside. You ever work a job where the building feels like a living thing, all its hollow spaces and stale air watching you back? I did. I still do, kind of. I stayed on after this happened because the pay wasn't terrible and bills don't wait for courage. But after that night, everything about the place felt different. I started hearing the building breathe. I was the night guard at an office park, the kind of glass and concrete complex that looks expensive and sleepy at the same time. It's the kind of place people assume burglars don't bother with. Cameras, alarms, whatever security theater keeps suits sleeping. I like the steady routine. Clock in at 10 p.m. Walk the perimeter, activate the systems, sit in that tiny closet of a security office and watch static feeds until the caffeine wore off. The booth had no windows. It smelled like toner and old sweat. The monitors hummed like a distant sea. That night, it was raining hard, one of those persistent, insistent storms that fogs up everything. Rain has a way of turning the world into a smear. The cameras always fog during storms, and anywhere outside turned into a suggestion of shapes. I knew the cameras would be useless. Still, you check them anyway, because it's your job to hope a screen will save you. 30 minutes in, one of the motion detectors pinged. Front door cam. I pulled it up and saw nothing but a smear of water and the faint suggestion of movement, a dark smudge near the entry like someone trying to be a shadow. I went down to the first floor because it was standard. Check, reset, move on. The lobby was empty. Rain, reflections, and the beep of a distant fluorescent. The damp carpet left a sheen where 100 shoes had walked. Whoever it was had vanished. Maybe wrong building, I thought, shrugging like a man who carries his unease in an already full pocket. Back at the booth, I tried to distract myself with the usual. Log entries, thermostat checks, the slow, hypnotic scrolling of camera feeds. Then I heard a phone ring. Not the desk phone in the security room, that one was dead from disuse, but a clear, human ringtone coming from somewhere below. It sounded small in that cavernous building, like a single coin rolling in an empty room. It rang again, and again. I followed it because curiosity is as much a job hazard as laziness. The sound led me to a cubicle farm on the second floor, rows of desks swallowed by darkness, overhead lights off. Only one desk had a single pinpoint glow, a phone, blinking, unknown caller. That detail felt wrong in a way that sat in my teeth. Office extension numbers aren't public on a rainy midnight. Why that phone? Why that extension? I stood there for a second, palm pressed to the lip of a desk, and thought about reaching for it. Then I heard the building shift, the pipes, the HVAC, a distant thud that felt like a body settling somewhere it didn't belong, and I decided not to pick it up. It rang over and over like a pulse. Hours crawled. At 1 a.m., I made my rounds, the same steps I'd done 100 nights. Server room, stairwell, loading dock. 10 minutes and I was back at the booth logging the absence of anything interesting. Then a noise cracked the hushed rhythm, a thump that came up through the stairwell like someone had slammed a weighted fist against the bones of the building. It echoed and re-echoed and pushed the air out of me. My hands went cold. I ran down. Nothing in the corridors. The front door's alarm utility showed a little green light on one panel. Pause. I hadn't put it there. I toggled the system on and off 1,000 times, but never into a paused state. Whoever did that knew the system better than I did, which was worse for two reasons. It meant they were smart, and it meant they had time. Rain plastered the glass, and the night outside looked like someone had smeared ink with a fingertip. I relocked the door because jobs require gestures of competence, then sprinted up the stairs to recheck the third floor cameras. That's when the thing happened. The third floor hallway door, the one that opens onto the offices with the endlessly ringing phone, was wide. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening. Silence. Then, in a breath, everything went black. Not dim, not a flicker. Blackness like flicking a switch on life itself. I don't mean I lost sight for a second. I mean the world folded, the edges turned to velvet, and I felt my head empty out like someone had taken a scoop. The only thing that existed for that split second was a slow, distant sound, the heartbeat of the building, or my own, or both. When light returned, my knees buckled. My hands found the railing like anchors. I touched the back of my head and felt warmth that was not sweat. Then I remembered the impact, the blunt shock of someone's hand or a tool across the base of my skull, the taste of metal at the back of my mouth. I stumbled and tumbled down a few steps, vision swimming. In the hazy fringe of my sight, I caught movement in the doorway, a shape framed by the dark. Not a clear face, just the suggestion of shoulders and something long-armed. By the time I landed on the lobby floor, the shape was already gone. Instinct took over the rest. I clawed for my belt radio, the one you never think you'll need until you do, and punched 911 with fingers that couldn't feel. I hid behind my car in the empty lot as the rain sliced at me and waited, ears bent toward the building as if the stones themselves might cough up an answer. Time turned into a smear of sirens and questions. The police swept the building and found nothing. No footprints in the server room. No forced entry. No sign of anyone who might have hit me. I woke up in the ER with a bandage at the base of my skull and a concussion to name everything the world had done to me. The officers took statements like they do, precise, procedural, soft with pity. Without a description, without any prints, it's very hard to make a case. I told them about the phone, the green paused light, the fog cameras, the way the doorway on the third floor had been open like the building itself had exhaled. Later, I started connecting the dots the only way a sleepless mind can. The fog lenses, the rain, the unknown phone ringing at the same desk every hour, like a metronome. Whoever chose that night had thought about the cameras. Whoever dialed that extension had access to something not public. Whoever hit the alarm into pause had actual knowledge. This wasn't a random drunk. This was planning. Weeks passed and the company's response was a weird quiet. They never told me if anything was taken. They never told me if they reviewed their phone records. Corporate emails floated through like hints, polite and empty. I went back to work because rent doesn't care about trauma. The building, though, the building watched me the way a predator watches its prey after a failed attempt. Every floor creak sounded like a footstep. The phone in that cubicle? They moved it the week after, but sometimes when the office is empty and the rain hits just right, I swear I can hear a distant ring in my bones where the building remembers it. What haunts me is how clean everything else was. No prints, no forced entry, just a back of the head blow that could mean anything and a shadow that could be anyone. The professionalism of it is what chills me, the knowledge of systems, the patience to wait for rain, the willingness to pull a trigger on a building's blind spot. That's not the work of a kid looking for scrap. That's the work of someone who knows how to make a room stop keeping secrets. Sometimes I replay it and imagine options I didn't take. I imagine following the ringing phone, answering it, hearing the voice at the other end say something I couldn't unhear. Maybe I'd be alive and intact if I'd done something different. Maybe I'd be worse off. Fear turns hindsight into a butcher's block where every choice is a cut. I still go to that job some nights. I stand behind the monitors and my fingers hover over keys like a man who knows where the knives are but not who owns them. If you ever work a place with cameras and locked doors, listen to the way the building talks. A pause in a system can be more than a setting. A ringing phone on a midnight line can be a breadcrumb, and rain can be a curtain. Someone planned it, someone who knew how a guard thinks and where they'd be at 1 a.m. That's the part that keeps me awake. Not that a stranger could break in, but that someone could learn the small habits that make you predictable. and then use them like a map. If you ever hear a phone ring in an empty office at night, remember this. Some calls are bait, and some places remember how to swallow you whole. I was 16. Summer, sometime. I honestly can't pin the month, which makes the memory feel slipperier. My parents left for the weekend. No big trip, just gone for 2 days. I had the whole house to myself, which for a teen means doing whatever you want until your brain runs out of things to do. YouTube, gaming, the kitchen like a second bedroom. I lived upstairs in my little world with my headphones on most of the time. The house below me a quiet, breathing thing. At some point during one of those rounds, I don't remember if it was late afternoon or already dark, I started hearing voices. Not on the game, not on a video. A human voice, muffled and wet, like someone was talking through a thick sweater. At first I thought a video had autoplayed in another tab. I fumbled with the mouse, checked YouTube, paused. Everything else was silent. I took off my headphones, and that's when the house changed tone. It was raining outside, and rain has this way of smudging sounds. The voice was out there, under the eaves maybe, close to the house. It wasn't carrying from the street. It was the kind of sound that makes the skin on your arms prick, too near to be random. I had the window cracked open a little. I always did that in summer, so the voice came in as a shallow, gray murmur. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of someone talking to themselves or to someone else I couldn't hear. By the time I pushed myself out of the chair and walked to the window to listen closely, the noise stopped. Of course it did. I went downstairs like a rational person would, played it safe, checked the front and back, chest tight, but thinking it's probably nothing. There was nothing. Just rain and the slick dark of the yard. I grabbed chips to be casual, the most useless brave thing I could think of, and went back upstairs as if I hadn't heard anything at all. An hour later, while I was mid-game and completely absorbed, a voice cut through my headset. Not louder, clearer. It hopped right into my ear like it belonged there. Even with the speakers on, it was different from the muffled outside voice earlier. It wasn't a stranger's voice in the distance. It was close, and when I took the headset off and listened properly, the house felt enormous in its silence. 15 awful seconds went by and then, Luke. It's a small thing, a name, but it hit like someone had pried my ribs apart and looked at my heart. My name. Not Lucas, not formal, Luke. The nickname I used with my friends. I'd never heard that voice before, but it said my name the way someone says it when they expect you to answer. That expectation made my stomach drop. I set the headset down like it might make a sound if it noticed me move. I moved to the bedroom door and eased it open. I tried not to breathe too loud. The house was the same house I'd always known, but the wood of the stairs felt like a different animal, older, thinner somehow. Just as the door cracked, he called my name again. Not shouting, soft, almost friendly, like a neighbor calling to borrow sugar. That was the worst part. The calm, the way his voice suggested familiarity. It had a gravelly rasp to it, the kind of voice that had been burned through cigarettes and time. Middle-aged, probably, with lungs that remembered smoke like an old psalm. When he said Luke, it landed right below the stairs. He was in the house. Something cold uncoiled in me. I backed away a hair and left the door open, because closing it felt like making a noise I couldn't take back. I moved to the back window, pushed it wider, and climbed out onto the little ledge above the porch. Not a roof, just that narrow slanted overhang you assume won't hold you if you think about it. It was wet from the rain, slick under my sneakers. It felt wrong. It felt necessary. My phone, of course, was on my desk inside. Smart decisions evaporate fast when your body decides for you. I was so focused on getting away that I forgot the thing that would have saved me minutes of insanity. A way to call someone. I told myself I'd slip back in, grab it quick, and crawl back out. I told myself a lot of things that night. When I peered back through the window, just a sliver, just enough to see, a shadow moved in the hallway near my door. Slow, like someone examining the house for time. I flattened myself against the damp wood of the ledge and held my breath until it felt like my lungs might fold, my heartbeat tattooed in my ears. For a few seconds it was just that, breath and the low thrum of rain. Then his voice again, quiet. Luke, not a shout, not an accusation. The kind of call you use when you think the person is right there, close enough to answer. I watched the shadow drift and pause by my desk. I could see the light hit the outline of something by my computer, maybe a jacket, maybe hands rifling. The image in my head was a silhouette on plaster, the slow turning of a head, a hand sliding over a desk. He was looking for something. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he wanted to know if anyone lived here. Maybe. My mind threw out options like flares, none of them bright. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to know who had taken my house and spoken my name like it belonged to him. But knowing a thing and seeing a thing are different. If you meet someone's face in a moment like that, it photographs itself behind your eyes. You can't stop that picture from developing. So I did the unglamorous thing. I went to the far end of the ledge. Under me was a bush and the yard, 8-10 feet of pitch and wet earth. I dangled for a second, feeling the world rear as if it could throw me clean. Then I let go. The fall was nothing cinematic. My legs folded on impact. Pain flared through my shins like lightning. I tasted metal, not blood, just that coppery, panic taste. And for a second all I could hear was the rain and the stupid thud of my heart. I scrambled up and ran to the neighbor's house, banging on doors like someone possessed. Nobody answered at first. People don't like opening doors to teenagers in the rain at midnight. You get that look that says you are a problem they didn't ask for. Finally a light, then a peephole, then a man with tired eyes opening a crack. I told him in bursts and stammers. Someone was in my house. He called my name. Please call the police. He did, but not without suspicion. The officer who showed up had that professional breath, calm, controlled. He walked through my house, took notes, asked the needed questions. The window in my room was wide open. My ledge had been checked. The intruder had been close. The officer said words like sheer luck and could have been worse, and I nodded as if that patched anything. He was gone. The windows were ajar. The curtains were still damp. My hands shook for hours. My legs turned into bruised jelly over the next few days. I filled out the police report, answered the same questions twice, cursed myself backward for leaving like a coward. Friends said I was lucky. Family hugged me like I was fragile. But luck isn't a blanket. It's a cold thing. The real horror for me wasn't the physical proximity, though that was terrifying. It was the intimacy of the voice. That small, ordinary-sounding Luke. It suggested he knew how to find the right name to use. It suggested he had been in houses enough to study how people sounded, how they reacted. It suggested planning. It suggested knowing patterns. Afterward, every small sound that would have been white noise before got heavy with meaning. The house seemed to hold its breath in a new way. A creak would freeze me. The faucet's drip would sound like someone counting. At night, I replayed the small decisions I'd made. The window left open, the headset on the desk, the phone in arm's reach I left behind. Those are the thin threads these memories hang from. Sometimes, on lightning nights or when the house is otherwise empty, I can still hear the echo of that voice in my head. Not full sentences, but that single syllable, like a key turned in a lock. Luke. It's ingrained now, a trigger. I catch myself flinching at normal things. A neighbor calling out, a delivery driver announcing himself. My sleep is full of pauses. My dreams are loud with silence. People told me to be grateful, to take extra precautions, to lock every door and close every window. I did. I changed where I slept, started keeping my phone on me, left lights on in the hallway. I thought time would make it feel less sharp. Instead, it smoothed it into a scar you forget about until you bump it, and it flares. Weeks later, there was no follow-up. No prints, no witness, no lead. The police did what they could with a house that had no forced entry and a teen who left through a window soaked with rain. Maybe the man slipped in when my parents were gone. Maybe he lived in the area. Maybe he never returned. Maybe he watched me and decided nothing would happen that night. Maybe he had a different plan entirely. The blankness of it, the not knowing, is what I keep awake more than anything else. Sometimes I replay the obvious choices and wish I'd been braver in a different way. I wish maybe I'd left my window closed or stayed quiet and called for help. Other times I think I did exactly what a terrified person should. I got out. If you walk people through fear rationally, they'll say the same thing. Don't engage, get out, call for help. But fear is messy, and the smartest advice sounds nice only when your heart isn't trying to climb out of your throat. He never came back, at least not that we ever knew. I like to tell myself that whatever plan he had fell through, that he moved on to something else, and that's the best possible ending. But sometimes I catch myself listening to the eaves outside my bedroom when it rains, waiting for the soft rasp of a voice that knows the name I use with my friends. I wait, and I remember the way the shadow looked on the plaster when he moved by my door, and how close the world felt to splitting open. People say the scary stories you hear online are exaggerated. Maybe this one is too. Maybe I'm the kind of person who remembers danger brighter than normal. All I know for sure is this. Someone stood in my house, called me by a name that made me feel ordinary, and then left. That ordinary call is the part that never settles. It's easy to close your eyes and picture an intruder, hat pulled low, a weapon, and then breathe out. But a voice that sounds like a neighbor, calm and practiced, and knows the small version of your name, that's a different kind of terror. That's the kind that sits in the small hours and folds itself neatly into how you move through a house you used to own. So if you ever hear a voice call your name, and it sounds like it could be someone you know, take it seriously. Not because the voice will always belong to a terror, but because someone can be close enough to say your name and still be a stranger. If you're lucky, you'll get away. If you're unlucky, you'll remember why. Either way, you'll never hear that syllable the same way again.